I haven't really been writing anything about law and where law actually came from and how statutes axe the straw man, all of that for a while. But here's a little overview, and it needs to be said because this is the foundation of the entire cage they've built around us. Step 1A. Understanding the Częstochowy Act 1666, existence of life, existence of death, existence of the game. London, 1666. Black Plague ripping through the streets, the Great Fire burning the city to ash. And while the public were dying and distracted, Parliament quietly sat behind closed doors and pushed through a private act that rewired the entire legal system, the Częstochowy Act 1666, the act that declared every man and woman dead, lost at sea, beyond the sea, because back then everything operated through Admiralty law, law of the sea, maritime jurisdiction. If you were not physically present in their system, they presumed you lost, they presumed you dead, and they used that presumption to seize everything you own. The State of London placed every soul and every piece of property into a trust. They became the trustee, the husband, the holder of all titles to the people and the property, and that control stays in their hands until a living man or woman comes back and proves they are alive and reclaims the titles, and yes, they can claim damages, because the system knows exactly what it did. Look at the use of capital letters in any legal document. That is not you. That is the dead entity, the corporation, the legal fiction. John Doe, Jane Doe, Doe Jane. That is the straw man. In New Zealand and Australia, they call it the Częstochowy Trust. In the US and Canada, they call it the straw man. Same creature, same construct, same illusion. Legally, we are treated as fictions, concepts, symbols, words on paper, a juristic person with no consciousness, ens legis, the paper ghost created in 1666, and London is not simply a city, it is an independent city-state just like the Vatican and Washington, D.C., 3 crowns, 3 city-states, 3 control centres of law, religion and military. The crown itself is an unincorporated association, meaning private, hidden, off record. The Temple Bar sits at its heart. Every lawyer called to the bar swears allegiance to the Temple Bar. They swear not to you, not to the public, not to truth, but to the private crown structure that owns the entire legal game. Your only way out is reclaiming the dead entity they created, standing as the executor, collapsing the Częstochowy Trust, clearing your debts, removing yourself from Admiralty jurisdiction. That is the escape route they hope you never understand. When London burned, they subrogated the rights of every man and woman. The CQV Act declared the population dead and lost beyond the seas. The state took every person and every property into trust. And here's what they don't tell you. We are still being presumed lost dead at sea today. The presumption was never lifted. The system treats you as a missing vessel adrift on the sea of commerce. They hold the title until you show up as a living man or woman and claim it. That is why in court you always need representation, because the system is talking to the dead entity, not to you. Look at your mail, bills, summons, fines, court paperwork, all capitals, tombstone font, because that is who they are writing to. The dead legal fiction that was created when you were born, when someone informed the government that a new vessel had arrived. Yes, vessel, because this is Admiralty, and vessels are registered at the dock. Birth certificates are issued by the doctor, dock, birth, ship, mother's waters, birth canal, currency, current. Nothing in this system is accidental. Everything ties back to commerce because maritime law is commerce law disguised as morality. Parents register their babies because they are tricked into thinking it is required. The moment they do, the child is recorded as cargo, a vessel, an asset, and the tie to Admiralty law becomes permanent unless reclaimed. In 1837, the Births, Deaths and Marriages Act centralised every record under the Registrar General, Regis, Crown, all people placed in custody of the Crown. That custody allows them to move you through the system like goods in a warehouse. That is why City of London is the centre of markets. merchants, commerce, mercantile law, and mercantile law comes from admiralty law. Commerce and money always bring justice and injury. You cannot understand the judiciary until you understand the bankruptcy. You accept the summons because only the dead can be summoned. You accept liability without knowing it. Any plea admits jurisdiction. Guilty or not guilty makes no difference. You acknowledge the court. You acknowledge the dead entity. That is how they capture you. Barristers and solicitors create controversy because controversy creates liability. More liability, more sound for them. Honor and dishonor. To remain in honor, you accept the claim and settle it. You add conditions. Proof of claim. Proof of loss. Push the liability back on them. The legal fiction is always guilty, but the living man can only appear in the high court. Everything below is theatre. A court is a game. Actors acting on acts. Courtroom dramas are propaganda. In public, you are operating inside bankruptcy and receiving benefits. To use the tools properly, you need time, effort, study, and full commitment. You must know how to act as a creation of God, not as a creation of the state. Now the canons. A cestui quaevi trust is a temporary testamentary trust created for someone presumed lost or dead at sea. First formed in 1540 under Henry VIII and updated in 1666. It can also be a secret trust or foreign situs trust. It applies to bankrupts, minors, incompetents and companies. These trusts last 70 years. If the presumptions don't exist, the trust cannot legally exist. The Crown Estate comes from Henry VIII, modified by James I. By the 18th century, the Crown was treated as a company. By 1814 it went bankrupt and became a private Crown corporation run by European banking families. A second line of cestui quaevi estates migrated to the US. Settlement of Ireland, Emergency Powers, 1931 Construction Acts, 2001 Patriot Act, all tied to emergency control. A third line concerned the soul. Ecclesiastical control migrated to the US. Settlement 1661, DC Act 1871, Lend-Lease 1941. By 1815, with the Rothschild takeover, the CQV trusts became private secret trusts managed by banks. From 1917 through sedition and trading with the enemy, acts citizens became enemies of the state. Trusts became foreign situs trusts. 1931 Vatican created the BIS, central banks installed as administrators of global trust assets. The global cestui quae system activated fully in 1933. Since 1933, every child born creates 3 CQV trusts: property, personal, ecclesiastical, designed to deny real rights forever by claiming the soul and spirit. Executors claim the baby as chattel, a slave contract using the imprint of the feet or blood. The parents sign unknowingly. The record becomes a promissory note, a bond, sold to private banks, converted into a second trust owned by the bank. When it matures, they cannot seize the child, so they issue a maritime lien and monetize it. The 3 trusts match the 3 forms of law: corporate, commercial, maritime and trust, Roman cult and Talmudic, all enforced through the bar courts. The birth certificate is the modern settlement certificate, marks you as pauper, Roman slave. It has no link to the private trusts and cannot force their disclosure. These private secret trusts are Roman bank property. You cannot claim them directly, but you can destroy the presumptions they rest on. Every man and woman can rebuke ownership over their name, body, mind and soul. When you claim your live-born record, any trust based on false presumption becomes empty. Any administrator refusing to dissolve a CQV trust once status is established is guilty of fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, removal and punishment required. I said before that the Cestui Quaevi Act was the skeleton. Part 2 is the bloodstream. This is where the paper ghost becomes the modern cage. This is where Admiralty law didn't just survive history, it evolved, it adapted. It buried itself under thousands of pages of legislation and procedure, and the public still walk around thinking they're free because they can choose between 2 identical political puppets every 4 years. That's not freedom. That's managed illusion. The presumption that we are lost dead at sea never ended. It wasn't symbolic. It wasn't historic. It is the operating system. The entire modern system is built on top of this maritime graveyard they call public law. They just changed the symbols, changed the uniforms, changed the wording, but the jurisdiction stayed the same: Admiralty, Maritime, Commerce. Every police officer is enforcing maritime commercial rules. That is why they ask for your name, not your identity. That is why they demand your date of birth, not proof of life. That is why they cite you like a vessel. That is why they charge you like a battery, because they are not talking to the living man. They are talking to the corporate vessel the state created. They don't need your consent. Your parents already gave it when they registered you. The moment your feet hit that birth record, they had their vessel, their property, their asset. Look around. Every part of this society is proof we are still floating in a legal ocean. Driving license, maritime permission, passport, maritime permission, bank account, maritime permission, voter registration, proof of cargo status, every tax bill, every fine, every summons is addressed to the dead entity. That is why everything is in capitals. That is why everything arrives with threats and penalties. Because in this system, the dead must be controlled and the living must never show up. You think banks operate on money? They don't. They operate on your bond. Your legal fiction is collateral. Your signature is currency. You sign a document and they convert your autograph into energy, into value, into debt instruments, bills of exchange, securities. The bank balance isn't real. The court fines aren't real. The mortgage isn't real. Every time you pay something, you are discharging debt with your own energy through the straw man. They monetize the debt through the trust. That is why they never teach you this. That is why they will arrest you if you open your mouth about it in a courtroom. Judges wear black because you are presumed dead. The court is a ship. The dock is a maritime dock. The bailiff is the debt collector for the captain of the ship. The clerk is the accountant of the estate. The entire structure is ritual. The entire ritual relies on you never standing as the living man. They need you to remain a ghost, a shadow, a corporate fiction. People think the crown is the top. No. The crown is middle management. The Vatican is the spiritual overlord. Washington, D.C. is the military arm. 3 city-states, 3 sovereignties, 3 heads of the same hydra. Vatican controls the soul. Crown controls the commerce. DC controls the force. Between them, they hold the global population inside one unbroken legal presumption. Lost at sea, dead, absent, unable to claim anything. The straw man is the puppet they move. You are the power source they feed on. The trust is the vault. And every government agency is just another branch of the same ancient maritime ledger that started long before any of us were born. Reclaiming your status isn't a form, it isn't a letter, it isn't a TikTok trend. It's a process that requires knowledge, blood discipline, and absolute standing. You cannot dip your toe in, you cannot do half measures, you become the executor of the estate. You collapse presumptions, you issue notices, you rebut every attachment, you stand as the living man, you speak only in the first person, you refuse joinder, you refuse to step into the dock, and you operate from honor, not fear. The system collapses when the living show up. That is why they spend billions making sure you don't. That is the entire point of schools, media, politics, medicine, and every other institution that exists to keep you numb and distracted. They don't want awakened men. They want obedient vessels. Most people think the system controls them through laws or politics or fines. That's surface level. That's kindergarten. The real control sits in the architecture behind those systems, the architecture nobody voted for, nobody was told about, and nobody is allowed to question. If you want to understand the world you live in, you don't look at the government. You look at the power structure behind the government, the invisible hierarchy that has existed longer than your country, your crown, your parliaments, your kings, and your prime ministers. The modern world is not run by nations, it is run by jurisdictions, and these jurisdictions come from one source: ancient ecclesiastical law, the law of the church, the law of claims over souls. That's what people refuse to understand. Your straw man, your birth certificate, your trust, your estate. It all ties back to the Vatican's global claim over humanity as spiritual property. The Crown handles the commercial slavery, Washington DC handles the military enforcement, but the Vatican holds the master template, the spiritual deed, the original claim. This is why all law is layered. Roman canon law sits above Admiralty maritime law, which sits above civil statutory law, which sits above your living rights as a man. They invert the hierarchy so you never touch the top. It's a pyramid designed upside down. And here's the real kicker. Every system of identity, every record, every certificate, every registration is part of the global management system for the souls they believe they own. Yes, souls. That is why the Vatican has a bank. That is why the Vatican has a legal code. That is why the Vatican has diplomatic immunity worldwide. They don't operate like a religion. They operate like a sovereign corporation with its own claim over the world's population. The Crown enforces the commerce, but they answer to Rome. The City of London looks like finance, but its real function is extraction. Debt extraction, energy extraction, labour extraction. You aren't taxed because they need money. They create money out of thin air. You're taxed because they need authority over you. Tax is a jurisdictional tether, a leash, a claim that you exist only through the permission of the Crown. And Washington DC, the military arm, the enforcer, the final hammer. Police are the local foot soldiers. Courts are the administrative nodes. Government is the public front. But DC is the blade they use when the game of civil society fails to keep the herd in line. That's why the US flag in a courtroom has gold fringe. That's maritime jurisdiction, war jurisdiction, emergency powers, perpetual emergency since 1933. You think that's an accident? Now let's talk about what they really fear. The living man, not the citizen, not the person, not the entity, not the vessel. The living man, the one who knows what was done, the one who knows the act, the one who knows the presumptions, the one who knows how to rebut the paper chains, the one who knows the system is terrified of anyone who steps outside the dead identity they assigned. Because the moment you stand as a living being, you exit their jurisdiction. You break the maritime spell. You collapse the trust. You nullify the claims. You flip the hierarchy back into its natural order. And that scares them more than any protest ballot or political rant ever could. Once you understand the trust system, you realize something else. You were never meant to be free. You were meant to be managed, measured, tracked, accounted for, from cradle to grave. Everything about your life is a ledger entry inside a system older than your surname, older than your language, older than your country,